You did it! You did it! You did it! You did it! You murdered my misery! She can't be dead. Misery Chastain cannot be dead.
Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and murderous superfans. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Misery. This 1990 psychological horror follows famed novelist Paul Sheldon after he crashes in the Colorado wilderness. He's rescued by a local woman named Annie Wilkes, who just so happens to be his #1 fan. But it becomes clear that Annie has no intention of letting Paul go, and her behavior becomes increasingly violent when she learns he's killed off her favorite character. She forces him to write a new book to match her own twisted fantasies, and Paul begins devising a plan to escape. Misery is of course an adaptation of Stephen King's 1987 novel of the same name. He wrote Misery during a pretty rough period where he was struggling with addiction, and he's described the character of Annie Wilkes as a stand-in for the control that cocaine had over him at the time. Similar to Jack Torrance in The Shining, Paul Sheldon is an author and essentially a stand-in for King as he worked through his own demons. The book did really well in sales and with critics, even winning the Bram Stoker Award for Best Novel. There's at least one noteworthy big change between the book and the film, but I'll wait until after the breakdown to get into that. Misery was directed by Reiner, whose very versatile career has brought us The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, and another King adaptation with Stand By Me. The screenplay was written by William Goldman of films like Butch Cassidy and All the President's Men, who had just worked with Reiner on The Princess Bride. Misery is almost entirely a two-person show, with the film starring James Caan from The Godfather, Thief, and Elf, alongside Kathy Bates from Fried Green Tomatoes, Midnight in Paris, and other King adaptations like The Stand and Dolores Claiborne. Even 35 years later, Misery has remained amongst both actors' best performances of all time. Cinematography was handled by Barry Sonnenfeld of films like Raising Arizona and Blood Simple, and the score was composed by Mark Shaman of Hairspray and Sleepless in Seattle. Both of them had also worked with Reiner on Harry Met Sally. Misery ultimately grossed $60 million at the box office, tripling its budget and proving to be a big success. It was met with great reviews from critics as well, who enjoyed the standout performances of Bates and Caan, the grounded yet disturbing plot, and the overall sense of claustrophobia. Bates went on to win Best Actress at the Academy Awards, and the character of Annie is often included in lists of the best horror villains of all time. Misery currently has a 91 and 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 4 on Letterboxd, so people clearly have a lot of appreciation for this classic. Thank you so much to my patrons for voting for Misery for me to cover on the channel. I had given them a bunch of fun Christmas and winter horror to vote for, and this ultimately came out on top. And now that we've reached the end of the year, I just want to take a moment to thank my patrons, all of my subscribers, and all of you watching at home that maybe aren't subscribed. I hope y'all had a great 2024 despite the seemingly constant stream of crazy shit that is always happening these days. In 2024 myself, I got married, I got a master's degree, I moved to a different state. It was a very, very busy year for me. I think 2025 is going to be a lot more chill, so I'll probably have a bit more time to review hamburgers and horror movies. I'd really appreciate it if you considered subscribing to the channel and even checking out the Patreon if you're interested in supporting the channel further. But hey, with all of that said, it's probably time we get started. I hope you dirty birds have been watching your language, because we're watching Misery. The movie opens on author Paul Sheldon as he privately celebrates the completion of a new story. But it ain't all good news, because while Paul's driving through the thick Colorado snow on his way home to New York, he loses control of the car and goes crashing down a hill. This takes us to a flashback where he shares disdain for the current book series he's been stuck doing, which is appropriately titled Misery. These Victorian romance novels have been very popular and given Paul a great life, but he wants to focus on more serious work. He's decided to kill Misery in his newest book, Misery's Child, which will be released in the coming months. He spent those months in Colorado finishing his new idea, which just so happens to be the manuscript freezing with him in the ice. But just when all hope seems lost, a friendly passerby rescues Paul and carries him home.
There is nothing to worry about. You're gonna be just fine.
The bruised up king awakens 2 days later in the home of Annie Wilkes, who claims to be his #1 fan. Trust me, you'll believe her. Oh wow, and she's a nurse. I think you've really lucked out, Paul. She explains that there's an intense blizzard that's preventing her from taking him to the hospital, and unfortunately the phone lines are down, so they'll have to wait until the roads are clear. She managed to pop his dislocated shoulder into place, but the real kickers are his 2 broken legs. Yeah, he's all fucked up. Paul's agent Marcia has learned he checked out of his hotel last week, and when nobody can get a hold of him, she calls the Silver Spring police chief. Buster is actually hella chill and tells Marcia he'll keep an eye out for any abandoned cars or missing persons reports, but for now he can't do much to help her. Annie reveals that she's been following Paul since he got to Silver Creek. The whole town knows of him and his annual trips to their lodge, but Annie takes it a step further and watches him right from outside. Uh-oh. She saw him leaving as the blizzard was approaching and took it upon herself to make sure he got back safely. She's read every single one of his books, but the Misery series has a special place in her heart. She noticed the manuscript in his satchel, and Paul is happy to let his #1 fan give it a read. Meanwhile, Buster visits the lodge and confirms with the manager that there was nothing strange about Paul's departure. Annie's gotten 40 pages into the new book and shares that the profanity several characters use really bothers her.
What do you think I say when I go to the feed store in town? Oh, now, Wally, give me a bag of that effing pig feed and 10 pounds that bitchly cow corn?
Yeah, looks like Annie may have a screw loose.
I love you, Paul.
Make that a couple of screws. Buster and his horny wife Virginia come across a suspiciously snapped tree by the road, but unfortunately Paul's car was too covered for them to spot. Annie spots them as they head back to their truck, and she don't like that shit one little bit. She returns home with a brand new copy of Misery's Child, also claiming she spoke to Marcia and let her know he's okay. But supposedly her phone is still disconnected and the road to the hospital is still closed. Right. She gets 75 pages into Misery's Child and rewards him with a bomb-looking breakfast. Honestly, if my kidnapper makes me breakfast like that every day, I'd definitely develop Stockholm Syndrome. Next, Annie introduces Paul to her pet pig, who is obviously named Misery.
Misery.
Yes, I told you I was your #1 fan.
Yeah, I'm starting to believe you.
She's on page 300 now, so we're quickly approaching Misery's death. Annie shares that she discovered his books after her husband left her while she was taking a lot of overnight shifts at the hospital. Misery helped her forget about all her problems. She'd read them over and over and over. She excitedly runs off to finish the book, and that night she discovers Misery's tragic end.
She can't be dead. Misery Chastain cannot be dead.
She goes on a rampage and nearly smashes Paul with a side table, and she declares that Paul is just a no-good dirty birdie.
I don't want her dead! I want her! And you murdered her!
She also reveals what we've all been suspecting.
And don't even think about anybody coming for you. Not the doctors, not your agent, not your family, because I never called them. Nobody knows you're here.
She heads out to blow off some steam, so Paul makes a very slow and painful escape attempt. Sadly, the broken man is locked in. Now there is a national search for Paul that even involves the FBI, but nobody knows where to look. Annie's more chipper the next morning because she spoke to God and discovered that he wants her to show Paul the way to goodness. Oh, That's great news. And apparently the first step is to burn up his potty mouth schlock he's been working on.
Can't you see it's what God wants? You're so brilliant, I would think you'd certainly be able to see that.
He's very reluctant to do it, but once she starts dousing him in lighter fluid, he decides it's probably for the best. They watch as Buster flies over in a helicopter, but with no evidence of Paul, they keep it moving. Paul does take this as an opportunity to stash his painkillers under the mattress though. Over time, he builds up a little pharmacy, and Annie sets him up with a wheelchair, table, and typewriter so he can get started on Misery's return. Heck, Paul, you can even write it in my honor. Paul notices a bobby pin on the floor, so he tries to convince Annie to head to town to get him some paper that doesn't smudge. She does not take kindly to this though.
Well, I'll get your stupid paper, but you just better start showing me a little more appreciation around here, Mr. Man.
But it does get her out of the house, so Paul uses the pin to jimmy open the door. Unfortunately, the front door's locked and she's even disconnected the phone. Bro, quit playing with the fucking tchotchke, she's almost home! He snags another pack of painkillers and fails to escape from the kitchen as she pulls up. Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck. Paul narrowly manages to relock his door and hide his crotch pills thanks to some strategic crocodile tears.
Your color is very hectic. What have you been doing?
You know damn well what I've been doing. I've been sitting here suffering. I need my pills.
Buster finally finds Paul's car and the authorities are happy to declare him dead in the wilderness, but the sheriff isn't so sure. Paul transfers his night-night powder into a paper pouch and he gets started on the next Tarantino script. He allows Annie to read Misery's End as he works through it, but she isn't satisfied with the cheap way he simply changed the fact that Misery died in the last book. She thinks back to her favorite TV series as a kid and the way she felt cheated when the main character suddenly escaped from a burning car he was supposed to die in the previous episode.
They just cheated us! This isn't fair! He didn't get out of the cock-a-doodie car!
Misery was dead and buried, so he's got to start from there to bring her back. He comes up with the idea that a bee sting put Misery in a coma, and gravedigger Wilkes realized she was mistakenly buried alive. Annie fucking loves that. Paul asks her to have dinner with him tonight, and she loves that even more. Meanwhile, Buster is reading the Misery series to get to know his supposedly dead man better. Annie lets Mr. Man out into the dining room for their date night, where they enjoy a delicious meatloaf. Yum. Paul convinces her to search for some candles while he pours some wine, which means Annie's gonna get a little extra something in hers. But as they toast to Misery, she accidentally spills her wine glass. Ah, well, back to the drawing board. Time passes, more chapters are written, and Paul starts making those gains.
Annie, what is it?
The rain. Sometimes it gives me the blues.
On a rainy night, Annie mourns that their time together is nearing an end since Paul's book is almost finished and his legs are almost better. Paul feigns as though he'd rather stay here, but even deranged-ass Annie knows that isn't true. She whips out a blicky and says she may need to use it soon. Oh damn. She heads out into the night, so Paul makes a beeline for the knives. He also finds a disturbing scrapbook that details Annie's life, in which some articles indicate that Annie may have killed her father, a classmate, her boss, and multiple babies. She was actually accused of the baby deaths, but was never found guilty due to a lack of evidence. She returns home later that night, but looks like Paul will have to wait till morning to get his stab on. Oh fuck, never mind, Annie knocks his ass out. He wakes that morning to find himself strapped down. Ah damn, she got the knife and bobby pin too. Annie knows that in time Paul will come to accept his wonderful life here, but for now he may need a little assistance.
Paul, do you know about the early days of the Kimberley diamond mines? Do you know what they did to the native workers who stole diamonds? The operation was called hobbling.
She proceeds to smash both of Bro's ankles with a fucking sledgehammer. Ouch. Meanwhile, Buster's been doing his homework on Annie due to her proximity to Paul's disappearance and her criminal past, and in an article he notices that she quoted a Misery book during her trial. Dun dun dun! He also confirms that she's been buying up a lot of paper, and that's enough for this old sheriff to pay her a visit. Annie puts Paul to sleep again and hides him in the basement as Buster approaches, and she cautiously allows the sheriff inside as he asks about Sheldon. She plays off the makeshift writing studio as though she's been trying to master Paul's style of writing since she won't be able to read his books anymore. Right. He doesn't find anything truly incriminating though and begins to head out. That is until Paul comes to and starts making a racket in the basement. He finds Paul at the foot of the stairs, but the sweet old man is quickly shot from point blank range with a double barrel. Sheriff Buster, Dick Halloran, the unlikable husband, and Cujo, if there's one thing you can expect in a King story, it's that the protagonist is gonna get zero outside help in taking down the evil presence. Annie decides that their time together has reached its end, and she loads 2 bullets into her gun. One for each of them. Paul has one final argument to save his life though, convincing her that he needs to bring Misery back to the world before they can go.
By dawn, we'll be able to give Misery back to the world.
He also snags some lighter fluid while she isn't looking. She allows him to get back to work, also planning to get the 3 things Paul needs whenever he finishes a new book. 1 cigarette, 1 match to light it, and a nice cold glass of Dom Perignon. He finishes the story and sends Annie to grab a glass for herself, at which point he prepares his final attack. He douses the manuscript in lighter fluid, and when she returns, he lights the match. Paul conks her in the head with a typewriter and digs his thumbs into her eyes, but Annie manages to shoot him in the shoulder. He is able to dive bomb her and gets her to waste her last shot though. He shoves the burning manuscript into her mouth and she kicks him in the balls, but then Annie trips over his broken legs and bashes her head right into the typewriter. That isn't quite enough to finish her off, but Paul finally kills his captor with a doorstop shaped like her pet pig Misery. Ah, poetic justice. We jump a year and a half later where Paul is back home in New York City. His new book is a big hit with critics. Marcia asks if he'd consider a non-fiction book about what happened in Colorado, but while Paul admits that in some ways Annie actually helped him, he isn't willing to relive that horror for any amount of money. He admits that he still sees Annie from time to time, like with this lovely waitress here, and she just happens to be his #1 fan.
That's very sweet of you.
And that's Misery. Oh my gosh, I forgot how much fun this one is. Now you might be thinking, Noah, fun is kind of a fucked up way to describe Misery, but honestly I stand by it. There's so much dark humor mixed into this very depressing story, and both leads bounce off each other so well that there's a lot of energy despite there being a lot of stillness and very few locations throughout the film. Annie is such a dynamic character. Her motherly outward appearance, her fits of rage, her childlike language, and her propensity for cruelty leave you guessing about what she's gonna do next. Kathy Bates just fucking crushes it in this role. I cannot imagine Annie being played by anybody else. James Caan also does a fantastic job in a slightly more subdued performance as he tries to manage his temper and emotion while dealing with this volatile situation. I love that his character is really smart. He's constantly thinking through his next moves, whether that's for escaping or simply quelling Annie's next outburst. Not to mention, Annie's really smart in her own terrifying way as well. I love films that don't rely on stupid mistakes or illogical decisions to move the plot forward. This is a tit-for-tat, cat-and-mouse game between 2 worthy opponents. I consider Misery to be one of the very best screen adaptations of a King story, partially due to one of the very big changes that they made from the book. Spoiler alert if you want to read the book, skip ahead like 1 minute. In the novel, Annie actually cuts off one of Paul's feet instead of hobbling it. I think the severing works perfectly for the book format, as it's a visceral image to imagine and a physical embodiment of what Paul has lost. But I think the hobbling is a way better option for film. One, you don't have to try to hide James Caan's foot for the rest of the movie, but it's also a more unique way to instill pain and force captivity. It's a punishment that Annie could execute over and over again because she can keep healing his legs, which in a lot of ways is a lot more scarier than a one-time dismemberment. I also really enjoy the supporting cast. Richard Farnsworth and Frances Sternhagen have relatively small roles, but they help breathe a sense of life and fun into the outside world. I'm kinda sad that Virginia didn't get any kind of goodbye or mourning scene after Buster's shooting, but it probably would have felt tacked on anyway. I really love the continuous focus on the window and changing weather. It provides us with the passage of time without beating us over the head with specific amounts of time for how long it's been. Misery the pig is also such a funny inclusion. She adds just a tinge of humanity to Annie and her unbridled obsession. The fact that her killing blow is with a doorstop in the shape of Misery is just icing on the cake. Reeling back to Stephen King for a moment, I really love all the films where he's really exploring his own fear of entrapment. This and Gerald's Game are first to mind, but The Shining also falls into this category. Sheldon is trapped in many ways. Trapped writing the Misery series, trapped in a bed and in a chair, trapped in this room. Of course, the hobbling and other moments of violence are the really horrific moments, but most of the film's tension comes from our lead's inability to leave or fight back. It's the idea that you've gotten pushed into a corner or even pushed yourself into a corner, whether it be drug addiction, a writing style, or a crazy person that's kidnapped you, and you are the only one that can get yourself out of this situation. The idea that ultimately nobody is going to save you but yourself. All in all, I really love Misery. It's a relatively simple premise and film, but it's done very effectively. It's anchored by two very strong performances that are perfectly casted. It has some great moments of dark comedy, some brutal moments of violence, and constantly building tension. It also has some great meta commentary on what it's like to be an author, and it's a story that allowed King to live out one of his personal worst nightmares. If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend you give it a watch. It's perfect for a cold, snowy night. Well, that's about it. What do y'all think of Misery though? Is it one of your favorites for this time of year? If not, what are some of your favorite winter horror movies? Let me know down below. So yeah, that's my final review of 2024. It's been a wonderful year full of wonderful horror movies, and here's to even more in 2025. Thank you all so much for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. Every single view and like and comment and all of that YouTube shit, it genuinely means so much to me. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Misery. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.